Spins, welcome back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast, an annual tradition unlike any other that you are kind enough to indulge, where I have you on to just extract as much NBA draft information out of your brain as humanly possible. We're doing this probably a little bit earlier than we normally would because you have pending nuptials. Congratulations to you. We absolutely love to see it. I appreciate you coming on, though, as always. The biggest, most important question I have for you, though, how are you doing?
Oh, Dan, always good to be here, man. The Hardwood Knocks are always a friendly confines for me. Love being here. Love chatting with you about the NBA. Yes, our annual tradition, going over the draft, and a little bit sooner than we typically do because I'm taking about a 2-week hiatus right before the draft. What timing could be better? But getting married, heading out, setting sail, and putting my phone, my Twitter, my laptop, all of the film stuff on hold for a couple weeks, which is very challenging for me to do. I love doing draft work, and this is a busy and fun time of year, but happy wife, happy life. So I'm going to start practicing that early and make sure that we have a great time with our wedding, our honeymoon. But let's get down to business today and talk NBA draft stuff, because this is actually turning into a super fascinating draft cycle.
Well, first, assuming everyone listened to the intro, Spins is a sicko with the amount of work that he puts into this, just between coaching a basketball team and then all the content he puts out. It's psychotic. And I hope you actually do put your phone, Twitter, everything away for a couple weeks. You deserve it. And also, speaking as someone who did not do that after they tried to take some time off from their honeymoon, your significant other will dramatically appreciate it when you do. So just some friendly advice that you didn't ask for. But everyone deserves to unplug, you especially, though. I would argue it's needed. That being said, please let me now force you to return to the grind by asking you about the draft. We have to start, I think, just with the big three. Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, and Jabari Smith. What is I've seen them. I thought leading in that there would we get to a consensus for the number one pick, and maybe we will be as more information trickles out. But I've seen everyone from Paolo to Chet to Jabari mocked at number one. And so how do you sort of delineate between these three right now?
So there are two ways to look at that. One is with the buzz that's creating around the NBA and where things are trending from a consensus, a mainstream standpoint. That seems to be going towards Jabari Smith out of Auburn a little bit more because he has a great deal of offensive upside. You very rarely see guys who are 6'10 or 6'11 that shoot the ball as purely and as cleanly as he can, both in spot ups, pick and pops, on the move and screening actions. He's a really good isolation scorer, and at that size, the turnaround jumper, the one dribble pull-ups in the mid-range, he just shoots over the top of anybody defending him. He's essentially a really big shooting wing and has a little bit of fluidity to him. I'm not the biggest Jabari Smith fan, and I know we'll get into that. I actually have him fourth on my overall board. So there's some lack of harmony going on between what I'm seeing and what a lot of other executives and teams and kind of the consensus experts out there are feeling their way through. But Jabari seems to be inching slightly above everybody else. I think Chet Holmgren is the one guy who's a lock to go top two. Still a chance that he goes number one overall to Orlando, but just with his combination of length, perimeter skills, defensive impact, he's going to be really valued for the Oklahoma City franchise if he's available at 2. And then Paolo Banchero, who's my number one prospect, a really big fan of his polished offensive arsenal. Think that he comes in, makes an immediate impact because he's ready to shoulder a pretty strong offensive load, but not as poor of a defender as some outlets may either lead you to believe or just have bought into. So I actually don't think Paolo's defense is anything to worry about. And because of that, I just feel really, really comfortable with the polished offensive arsenal and saying that he should be the top guy in this class.
I'm in love with Paolo, and I think probably because I've consumed so much Box and One content, maybe you just brainwashed me to love him as well. I'm going to ask you how you would order them out, but I feel like we need to get, when you're looking at how the teams might draft, to the root of how their impacts might scale out. Next season, who among the three is ready to have the most immediate impact on their team?
I think Paolo, scoring guys who are physically ready coming to the NBA and are just ready to go. Jabari is probably a little bit more role dependent on guards that are going to be able to get him the ball. And the biggest reason for that is because he's not a self-creator that gets to the rim. He doesn't have a very good handle. There's something mechanically a little bit different about him. He's reliant on guys being able to create open shots for him. Now, he can make tough ones off one dribbles or isolations around the elbow area, but his best usage is going to be more of a drive and kick guy where he's standing there and knocking down open shots created by others. Chet, physically, you never know how those guys really fare at their size and skinniness coming in year one in the league. So I don't think it's a long-term concern that would prevent me from drafting Holmgren, but I also think that what we saw this year with Evan Mobley was the perfect team and organization to blanket him while his body needs that time to develop. Jarrett Allen having another rim protector in Cleveland helped Mobley make that transition. I think that, again, situation dependent, Chet might have that if he goes in any of those teams in the top three, but if it's Oklahoma City, which seems to be the most likely outcome at this point, I don't know if he'll have that. So by process of elimination, I'm going Paolo for immediate impact.
Fast, and I think this is actually an important part of the discussion that might not get talked about enough. And we had this conversation last year, which I didn't draft again, bring it up again, where we're both kind of best player available over fit, especially when you're this high in the draft. So I look at this and I go, well, who do we think among these three, 5 years, 7 years down the line is going to be the best player, has the highest ceiling? And you in the outline said that it was super tough for you to pick, but who would you lean towards if I forced you to choose, which obviously I am?
Yeah, I lean towards Chet just because I think his defensive impact is enormous. And I know the constraints of the offense that he played in at Gonzaga, that he most likely has more to his game than he was able to show in the system that he played in college. Auburn and Duke both really built their offenses around their top guys. So the farthest away from being able to demonstrate what an ideal offensive version of him is would be Chet Holmgren. So because of that, I think it's slightly higher upside, but he probably of the three has the most clear physical limitations. So, it becomes a risk reward thing. Excuse me. And look, every franchise has to make that decision for themselves. I think best player available is always the way to go in the draft. But when you're, convinced that two or three guys are neck and neck and in that same tier, it's less about fit for the top guys in the draft and more about what's the ideal way you want to build your organization. What do you want to build around? Is it having that one offensive cornerstone? Then it's probably Paolo. Is it the defensive cornerstone? Then it's probably Chet. Is it the high upside guy who also is an incredibly valuable role player because he's an elite three-point shooter and has some switchable defense? Then it's Jabari. So that's really the risk reward or the pros and cons that teams are sifting through at this point, as opposed to trying to figure out who's really the best player amongst them. I think it's pretty neck and neck for a lot of teams. And when you hear fit in that conversation, it's not fit with the roster that they have. It's fit with the roster they want to build.
I do think what is interesting, and this does skew heavily towards, well, this is the roster they have. You look at two of these teams in the top three, Orlando and Houston. There are already, I wouldn't call any of them foundational bigs, but Orlando has Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac. Houston has Alperen Şengün. Can all of these three bigs that are coming in the draft, can they operate alongside another big, or even looking at the rosters that they're prospectively going on to now? Is there anything that could be prohibitive? Because it does matter. Like if you're bringing someone into a situation in, let's just say Orlando, and you can't really play alongside Wendell Carter Jr., but you paid him and he's good, so how are you not going to play him? Then you have to stagger to make it effective. Can all of these guys, since it does seem, at least theoretically, up in the air, that all three of these players can also operate alongside what would be another big? I don't want to call it a center or power forward, but just another big.
And I appreciate you not calling it that. They definitely can. Yeah, all three of them in different ways, right? So I think the hardest combination to find would be putting Jabari Smith with a non-rim protecting big.
Okay.
But you can still make it work if you're offensively potent enough that you're just outscoring teams on the other end. So I think every guy can fit in with another big man. I would say that Jabari and Paolo probably have to. Chet is the only one long-term that I would say I'd be okay with this guy playing the five. but year one, he's not physically ready for that role. So I think all of them project more as a 4 in their immediate impact, and how the game evolves over the next decade, how their skill continues to move out, or in Chet's case, how he physically develops, is going to dictate whether they play the 4 or the 5, and really what types of guys are best with them.
That's interesting on Paolo. And I know that John Hollinger has called it space ball, where it's these bigger players who can play like smalls. So you're not playing small ball and you can kind of throw, the positional size out the window. But I look at him, and that's interesting that you consider him a 4 long-term, and more about, or like needs a co-big man almost long-term, to where you're not going to have him as the only big. That's just interesting to me.
Sure. And I think that's probably one of the reasons he's most frequently mocked at 3 in a lot of mainstream boards right now, is because they're seeing the need to have the right guy next to him. What I think is, those guys are easy to get in the NBA, rim protectors who can stand in the dunker spot or play pick and roll and just slam it down and provide value. I think that's an easy acquisition to make. And if that enhances Paolo Banchero, then why would you steer away from taking him with the top overall pick?
So how do you, I think we all know by now, and anyone who watched Box N1's mock draft 3.0 knows too, but how do you have them mocked right now?
So I have, for what I would do, Paolo 1 to Orlando, Chet 2 to Oklahoma City. And again, that's the 2 best players in the draft, in my opinion. And Chet being that one guy that I really love the fit in Oklahoma City. And then I would have Jabari 3 to Houston.
And it does seem like, though, that a lot of people believe Jabari is going to be the actual player that goes number 1 to Orlando.
Yeah, they do. And then Chet 2, and that would leave Paolo for 3, which, again, great fits for Houston, either with Jabari, or really with any of them. Yeah, I think Houston's in the driver's seat here and feeling comfortable taking whoever falls to 3. But I think that if Orlando ends up taking Jabari, then both Oklahoma City and Houston wind up with fantastic fits for their organization.
I couldn't be an NBA executive, because if I was in Houston, I would almost welcome the opportunity to be at 3, so I don't have to make the choice. It was made for me. Is there, let's just say, Orlando really convinces people they're undecided, or that they could take anyone, or maybe that they're in love with Chet. He seems like the guy that almost needs to go to Oklahoma City, or Oklahoma City needs him. Would you consider giving up something small if you're OKC to go from 2 to 1? Or does it need to would it have to be something bigger if you're, the thing I'm just thinking about is, if you're Orlando and you want it doesn't seem like they would take Chet. It just doesn't seem that way. And if you're not going to take him anyway, would you just take Kenrich Williams? Or would OKC give you one of their lower level first, just to jump that one spot to ensure that you get Chet, just because you're so close, you're so right there? Or is that sort of just a non-starter?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they absolutely have to consider it. And if they are dead set on getting Chet Holmgren, make the phone call, figure out what it costs to move up to number 1. I think the only fear of Orlando taking Chet, and the reason he's still somewhat in play at number 1, is because of the relationship with him and Jalen Suggs, 2 guys that have played together in the past. And, if they really believe Jalen's the guy to build around in the future, Chet can come in and anchor their defense. He fits their organizational MO, which has always been about length. He's the longest guy of these top 3. So there's a lot of reason to rationalize the fit for Chet in Orlando, but I don't know if right now the rumor mill is spinning fast enough to try to say that Oklahoma City has to make an offer to get up to number 1 in order to make sure they get Chet.
Orlando should absolutely make it so that they do, though.
No doubt.
Moving sort of on to the rest of the lottery topics, I think we have to begin with Jaden Ivey, who has been billed, except by you, as the clear number 4 guy in this draft. And so I guess, can I get your general thoughts on Jaden Ivey? Is he the no-brainer pick at number 4, even if we're throwing away the context of the team that's currently sitting there?
Which I don't know if we can do, because it's not just because, it's not because Sacramento doesn't have a great fit for Ivey, which they don't. There are some concerns about him and De'Aaron Fox playing side by side in the half court. It's that I am done trying to predict what the Sacramento Kings are going to do as an organization. You hear rumors out there that they're going to try to go all in and win now. Their general manager has not received an extension to date. He's on a lame duck contract, which makes it really hard to make the patient pick here, particularly if your owner knows that there are going to be teams calling up. What I believe is that Jaden Ivey is actually a top 3 prospect in this class. Unbelievable athlete, tier 1 type of guard. Derrick Rose meets Ja Morant type of hops and bursts and athleticism, particularly in the open court. But he can go from 0 to 60 and just go right around guys. And it's so impressive that he can handle the ball at that level and be able to score shiftily or powerfully in traffic. Developed a lot as a three-point shooter over the last year. I had major concerns about Ivey as a pick and roll playmaker, as a scorer in the mid-range. Those were the two kind of areas that were knocks on him coming into this draft cycle. I think the passing is actually pretty solid when you surround him with shooters and playing the spread pick and roll. And the mid-range stuff, it doesn't look good, but it's decently effective. So I'm not overall worried about the concerns never coming to fruition. And because he's such a top tier athlete at a guard position that's incredibly important, I really value what he brings to the table. Now, can Sacramento be patient enough to try to take a guy like him? I don't know. But if he's available at 4, he's such a clear-cut kind of prospect above everybody else that would be available that they're going to get calls about moving up to get Jaden Ivey. And it's just a question of if the Kings think the offer is right and have a package of a veteran to really entice them to try to win more now, which I think is a mistake, but it's the Kings, baby. Let's fire it up.
Yeah, and look, just what we know about the trade landscape right now, it doesn't seem like there's a player who's available that would make sense to trade. There is talk that the Blazers would give up number 7 for Jeremy Grant, which is just, Jeremy Grant is really good. That is just bonkers to me. And we'll get into that in a second. But the Kings, I can't tell if they were that in love with Sabonis. That was the most bizarre trade. It felt so random. If they thought that they needed to make a choice, though, between Halliburton and Fox, there's no way you look at Ivey and Fox then as a pairing that works. And so I'm with you that you should just take, if he's on the board and he is the best player available, just take him. But I could see the Kings either just moving for the sake of moving or drafting for fit. And I would argue the former is probably less detrimental. Like maybe you could move down if you want someone else in this draft. And I'm sure there are teams that want to, I look at the teams that probably wanted to hop in the top 4 and couldn't, like the Pacers, the Blazers aren't going to want Jaden Ivey, but like there are teams that should want to, even the Pistons falling out of the top 4. So unless you're going to be committed to a more gradual process, I really think that Sacramento needs to like non-detrimentally do something with this pick. I would say it's moved down because I don't like any of the actual players that they could probably get. For there's even when you're talking about, it's like if Bradley Beal wants to, like, what is Bradley Beal? Like, yeah, he helps the Kings, but with Sabonis and Beal and like, what is that absolutely doing for you? So it feels like the draft almost begins at number 4 in the sense that anything can just happen at that spot.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is because the top 3 teams there in Orlando, Oklahoma City, and Houston don't need guards, right? It becomes a lot harder to think about them taking Jaden Ivey in the top 3 because they feel so set both athletically and positionally at the same overlaps with Ivey. So the draft, those top 3, the order that they fall in is going to be important, but the real madness is going to start at 4 with trade up possibilities. Do the Kings just bite the bullet and take him? Are they going to be patient enough and go with the mystery man in this class, Shaedon Sharpe, who's kind of rumored to be around that top 5 area? So a lot of different avenues. As I say, if you're trying to predict the Sacramento Kings and what they're doing, you're an idiot because you're never going to be able to figure out exactly what's going on in their organization. And that's going to be a really fun one to sit back and watch.
Speaking as someone who is a little bit higher on the Fox Sabonis fit than I was at first blush, I don't even think the Kings know what they're doing. So let's just be fair there. So I invented a prospect apparently when doing the outline for you and called them Shaedon Sharpe when I was making this at 4 a.m. Shaedon Sharpe, what makes him such a polarizing prospect aside from is it anything functionally about his game, or is this just, he wasn't in college last year?
There's a lot of the mystery aspect at play. And it's not just that he didn't play in college. It's that he was such a late riser up recruiting boards in high school, kind of more of a fringe top 100 guy going into his junior year in high school, started to play really well, hit a growth spurt, athletically turned into a freak. And now all of a sudden he's going up recruiting boards, winds up at Kentucky, comes in a year early and tries to make all of this stuff work to prepare for whatever his thought process was. But Sharpe has been polarizing from the college basketball community, that fans of college basketball really don't love the thought of a top tier prospect coming in, practicing or working out with the team, and not having any intention of benefiting the program by ever stepping foot on the floor and playing, that they feel like Sharpe used Kentucky to essentially be a elite training ground for 6 months to get him ready for the draft and for NBA. So polarizing in a lot of senses in that regard. Polarizing as a prospect because he's such a fast riser and wasn't the clear-cut number one guy, all the way through his high school career. And then just the mystery of he hasn't played against legitimate competition in over a year. So how do we project guys who go from high school to the pros anymore? That's not something that general managers have been used to doing, and let alone something they had success with when they were used to doing it, 15 years ago, when guys could just declare right out of high school. So he's going to be polarizing. I love Sharpe because the consequences of missing don't fall back on me at all. Right. I don't have to live with not getting my next contract.
Right.
Shaedon Sharpe doesn't turn into anything. So it's a lot easier for me to say, hey, let's just take the swing. But legitimate superstar upside, athleticism, physicality, 6'11" wingspan, ability to shoot, and decent playmaking off the bounce. Like he's flashed so many great things that at 5, after the top 4 guys are off the board, he's the guy that has the clearest upside. There's no doubt about that. It's just, when are you willing to take that risk as an organization?
Do you, one, think that's probably the ceiling on where he'll be picked number 5? And 2, could you see this, just given the concerns and the lack of sample size over the past year plus, however long it's been? Does he have like sort of everyone has him mocked like in the 4, 5, 6, 7 range now or whatever? Does he have the potential to maybe even fall last minute?
I think so. I mean, I think anybody that's a wild card has the ability to fall if you feel really comfortable with the pieces that are also in that range in the draft. I would be shocked if he falls past Indiana, just because that's a franchise starving for a star, and they have the patience in the window and the positional fit to be able to invest in him. I can't see him getting past Indiana, but I think he's in play as high as 4 at Sacramento. Yeah.
I don't wish Sacramento upon him. If he's a project, I hope that I feel bad that I'm saying this about Kings fans, but I would prefer to see him in Detroit, Indiana, and literally anywhere else at this point. Who's the better, just looping archetypes into here, who's the better, long-term investment when you're sort of in this area of the lottery between, let's say, 5 and 9, whatever it is, between Bennedict, Mathurin, and Keegan Murray?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think it's going to depend on what you ask them to do. So I really like Keegan Murray, and analytical models love him because he has very few weak spots in his game. But if you are drafting him with the intention of turning him into a top 2 scorer on your franchise, I think that's a mistake. I think he's the perfect third cog. Plays a little bit like a Danny Granger-ish, Pascal Siakam-ish, Tobias Harris-ish type of guy. And I think that they're best when you have a primary who's a guard around them and another guy who can go create his own shot. Not really. He's more of a 4, kind of similar to what Paolo was. I think Keegan eventually will be able to play some smaller 5. I think he's skilled enough to play some 3, but really it's just going to depend about what you ask Keegan Murray to do. Bennedict Mathurin, I think, has a little bit higher of an upside at the next level because he's a little bit more live wire of an athlete. And I love his ability to shoot, not just catch and shoot on the perimeter, but as a movement guy. Mm-hmm. If you're a team that already has an established star or 2, but they need space in order to operate, they're a great athlete and they just, whatever the explanation is, I think Mathurin fits in a little bit better and has higher upside there. I think Murray is a better long-term investment for a team that, probably has the need for versatility in the front court because they don't have that already, but established stars or tent poles of the organization at the big and the guard spots already taken care of.
And you said you deem Keegan Murray would probably be the safer pick?
Yeah, definitely a little bit more of a safer pick. It's not necessarily that Mathurin has higher upside, but I think if both guys hit, Mathurin's role is more valuable. I love having movement shooters due to the gravity that they create and make everybody else better.
Looking at AJ Griffin, should teams actually be concerned about the dearth of things he does outside of shot making, but it's difficult shot making, is it not? So that's like, if you have to have, I don't want to call it a singular skill, but if you have to be like limited dimensionally, like that's the way to almost be. Or they're just, and I definitely wouldn't know, but like, are there any undersold bright spots of his game that aren't being talked up enough leading into the draft?
So to that last question, no.
Oh man.
Yeah, I'm not an AJ Griffin guy, and it's a shame. I did a podcast with Sam Vecini a couple days ago and talked a lot about AJ Griffin. And the thing that I keep circling back to is I absolutely loved him when he was in high school. Like, thought he was going to be the next superstar, freak athlete, really, really high flying player, skilled, shot the crap out of the ball, does everything well. He doesn't look like the same guy that I saw 2 years ago or 3 years ago when he was playing in New York City. It's concerning. He does not defend at a very high level. Now, he has the raw physical tools to eventually be able to get there, but he's so far behind everybody else in this draft class that it is a legitimate red flag that teams have to be aware of. Dan, I'm going to throw a coaching ism at you and a question for you. Do you know what the best ability is for a basketball coach?
Oh, God, no.
The best ability is availability. So when we talk about the dearth of all of the things that Griffin might not have in his game right now, or the upside to be able to add them, he's the one guy with injury concerns, with just a track record of not always being there. And part of that is bad luck and just how things have struck his body over the last few years. The other part of that is Coach K would remove him from the lineup at the end of games at Duke because he couldn't trust him to be on the floor in those moments. And if you're not a guy that's going to be available when the game is on the line, that puts a massive ceiling to me on where I'd be willing to draft you. It's one thing if it's positional and it's matchups, right? Like a big guy who has to be taken off the floor because the other team goes 5 guards. It's another thing when you're supposed to be this multi-positional athlete who's 6'6" and chiseled, and you just can't find a place on the floor to guard. That's really concerning to me.
Is the shot making then that prolific that, because I hear that, I listen to what you've said on the Box and One YouTube channel, I've read stuff on him, and then I'm kind of just like, when you look at some of these mock drafts, I'm almost like, okay, well then why not just go, if you're a team in this position, why AJ Griffin over Dyson Daniels, for example? Like, why is that something that exists if there are that many red flags attached to his game?
Yeah, I don't think it will end up being that way on draft night. I think that this is, again, I mentioned earlier, a lot of us who are sitting on the outside looking in, we don't have the fear of repercussions. So putting AJ Griffin 5th on a big board is so easy to do because you see the tantalizing upside. It's easy to sit back and say, hey, I'm going to bet on that guy, because why the hell not? And if he hits really big. But it doesn't work that way for NBA teams. I think that there are 3 really safe bets outside of the top 5. Keegan Murray, Dyson Daniels, Bennedict, Mathurin. That takes you down to 8. After there, like a guy like Jalen Duren from Memphis, a really talented, high upside big. The right team fit is going to be important for who gets him, but really, really high ceiling for a big guy. And then now we're talking back half of the lottery, where these are teams that are drafting that are ambitious about making the playoffs and doing so a little bit earlier in their, in the window of when they make this selection. So Griffin, to me, has a 10 to 18 type of range right now. And it's probably going to be a little bit on the earlier side because the upside is there, and he's a fantastic catch and shoot prospect. But I worry about a lot of things with him.
I will say I'm rooting for him to go earlier than not, because I would like the Knicks to take Dyson Daniels. If I'm trying to be realistic of who could be available, I don't know if he's still going to be there. Will Dyson Daniels still be available at number 11? Just say yes.
Yeah.
Can I pay you to say yes?
I wish I could. And the biggest reason I'll say no is because I think if he is around at 10, the Wizards would snatch him up. I think he's a great fit in Washington next to Bradley Beal, but he was a big winner out of the NBA draft combine last week in Chicago, and private workouts, the way that his shot has continued to progress and looks really good. I think he's closer to 5th than he is to 11th.
Well, that's a little bit upsetting, not unexpected. Do you think that his jumper is going to come along in the NBA?
Yeah, I would not bet against it. I think that he's shown decent growth in that area. I don't love the dribble pull-up stuff, but I think from a catch and shoot standpoint, he's going to at least be really solid, where he projects as an incredibly high-end role player, great defender, smart basketball IQ, long, lean finisher, amazing floater, which is important for guards to have in their bag these days. The one thing that's missing to me is the shooting reliability, particularly off the bounce. And if that ever comes, like he's a really, really dependable guy.
To sort of wrap up our lottery talk, what do you make, and I've seen this attached to mostly Mark Williams and Jalen Duren, about why take a center, a rim running, shot blocking center, someone, or even if that big can do more, but primarily their role is going to scale to that. Why draft that type of player in the lottery or hire at all when you can just go out on the free agency market and probably approximate a more established level of that when you're not talking about a rookie for maybe even much cheaper than what their rookie scale is going to pay them? What do you sort of make? Where do you land on that philosophy?
I used to really lean heavily into the idea that if it's not an elite big, like don't take them till at earliest the later part of the first round. I've kind of changed my tune over that, particularly in this draft cycle. Maybe that's changing the rules to fit the way you want the game to be played right now, but whatever, I can do what I want, I guess. I like Mark Williams and Jalen Duren as lottery prospects, and value is really more dependent on the rest of the draft class and the importance to the drafting team than it is just looking at the position and saying we need to avoid that. Like if you think both guys are starter caliber players and talents, then there becomes a point in the draft when getting a starting caliber player, regardless of the position, is better than swinging anywhere else. And I think that in this draft class, there's a little bit of a drop off when you get outside the top 14 or 15. So that would move them into lottery level talents, regardless of the positionality of things. And at some point, it just becomes ridiculous to pass on pretty safe bets, even if you say, well, that's not the ideal way that we would want to build our roster, because we can go bargain hunting for a similar type of guy elsewhere. Like I think there is enough upside, especially for Duren, because I view him as being a little bit switchable, that it's worth making the swing on. I have Duren as, I think, 9th on my board right now, and Mark Williams 11th or 12th. So, two guys that are guys I would project to be starters in the NBA. And I have a really hard time saying, just because of my philosophy, I'm not touching them until the later part of the first round, because I'm against that position and they don't shoot it well enough to deserve that versatile, functional type of role. So I'm starting to change my tune.
I think I've always sort of fallen on that side of the fence where you found yourself now. And I look at it through this way. And I hate talking about player salaries in this context, but it is part of the team building process. I'm not concerned about doing it when they're on their rookie scales, especially when you're talking about, let's say they take them at 10th, that's going to be about a 4-year, $20 million deal. It could be like that's not that much money. It's, do you want to pay that type of player on his second deal for what he would cost? That's where I think it becomes a more realistic question. And it's why I think I've seen, there have been jokes throughout Knicks Twitter is like, Jericho Sims is why you don't pay Mitchell Robinson big time money in free agency. That might be an extreme, but it's also right, because you've given that player, Mitchell Robinson was a bargain in itself when you look at where he was drafted in his contract. But if that player can develop, in Mitchell Robinson's case, where I've seen people compare him, like the Rudy Gobert comparisons are out the window, but I think the most egregious examples I've seen were and I think you and I actually even talked about this, were the Robert Williams III stuff, where it's like, no, Robert Williams is more dynamic when it comes to guarding on the perimeter and passing, among other things. But those are the two biggest factors that stand out to me. And Mitchell Robinson really failing to develop any type of feel on the offensive end. That is an indictment against his next contract if you're a team. And so looking at the lottery specifically, I wouldn't hesitate, especially if you think they're the best player available. Even if you're drafting for fit, if you like getting a center under lock and key for that many years at that price with some maybe higher upside, or there's depth to develop him, that still seems like a no-brainer to me. And I feel like we veered too far into the realm of, centers or big men are the new running backs. And it's just, It's not like that for me.
No, I totally agree. I think you said that pretty elegantly. Duren, he's 18 years old. He's the youngest guy in this draft class.
He's 18? My God.
Yeah, like he's super, super young. So he'll be 22 years old when his rookie contract expires. So what's the downside of giving him another 4 years? Yeah, you're going to have to pay a little bit for it, but monumental upside for what he's able to do at his young age. And then Mark Williams, 20 years old, really polished and able to come in and have an impact. Typically, the argument against the 4-year rookie contract cycle for bigs is that in order to be a starting caliber rim protector, you need like 2 years of NBA experience. You have to learn every single angle and call and be incredibly dependable as a communicator. Williams is much farther along in that trajectory than most young big men, which is why I say worth a lottery pick and able to come in and impact a franchise, at least in some role from day one. Mark Williams, he shot like 73% from the field this year. He led the NCAA in dunks, fantastic rim protector, and covered up a lot of mistakes that guys like AJ Griffin made on the perimeter for Duke. So I think an invaluable piece in a lot of ways. And again, if we're talking a starter or a really high-end role player at the end of the lottery, that's important. Like out of every draft class, there's usually no more than 20 to 23 guys that end up sticking in the NBA long-term on second deals and being valued members of a rotation. So if you believe that he's going to be that, take him in the top 20. Like there's very little argument that I think that there are few people out there that would think Mark Williams won't turn into that type of guy in the NBA.
And again, just the fact it doesn't really cost that much. Like you're not even paying them JaVale McGee money like at this point. So, and I guess you have Duren over Williams at this point on your big board, correct?
I do. Just leaning a little bit more towards the upside. I think it would be easy to put Williams ahead because of what we see now, but Duren's natural tools combined with how quickly he learned through his freshman season at Memphis give me a little bit more hope that he can get to a higher ceiling.